Greetings radio people, welcome to LAMCO Labs, deep in the bowels of LAM communications. Today we're going to bring you a tech video on the brand new shiny IC-7610 from ICOM. I'm going to show you a few things about basic config, how I've set the radio up the way I like it. I'm going to show you how to get it up and running with WSJT so you can run this ever popular FT8 mode. I'm going to show you how to connect an external Panadapter so you can use a software-defined radio externally from this box to have a screen of spectrum on your monitor. I'm going to show you how to connect a large external monitor to the radio so that you can see it all in its grand glory on a big telly, and I'm also going to show you how to use it with a transverter. So let's get on with it. So the first thing I want to do is take you through some of the basic configuration settings that I've changed in my radio. I want you to take note particularly of the way that the waterfall and the spectrum scope look. I've made quite a lot of drastic changes to that because I don't particularly like the way that it comes by default. So first of all, to illustrate this, what I'm going to do is press menu, press set, press others, and then press reset, and I'm going to reset the whole radio back to factory defaults so that I can make sure I go through all of the things that I've changed. So am I sure? Yes, I am. So the first thing you'll note is that the screen has now gone blank because by default the external monitor is not switched on. So I'm going to press menu, set, display, external display, and turn it on. And then I'm going to have to tell my monitor to switch to the second HDMI socket. And hopefully we've got the view back that we had before. So if I now turn on, by pressing menu and scope, if I now turn on the spectrum scope, hopefully you can see that that's really quite drastically different. So these are the changes that I made. If you see in the bottom right, we have expd/set, expand or set the waterfall. So I'm going to press and hold that, and that brings up a sub-menu that we're going to go through and make some changes to. So the first change I'm going to make is to this averaging. I'm going to set averaging to 3. Waveform type I'm going to change to be fill plus line. Waveform color current, I'm going to get rid of all of this and I'm going to make it black. So I'm pressing and holding the minus numbers and let that scroll down to all zeros. The waveform color line, I want that to be like a oscilloscope green because I happen to like that kind of green. So that's 02550 is the RGB value I've set there. And again, for waveform color max hold, I'm going to put that down to zeros because I don't actually want to see that. So I'm going to make that black. So we go back to there. And then I think everything else is about the same. I don't think I changed anything else. Oh, I did. I changed waterfall peak color level. I changed to grid 8. So this basically sets the intensity of the yellows and the reds on stronger signals. So I've set that back to grid 8. Now hopefully you can see the changes that have happened. I'm going to put the radio back into CW mode and wander down the band a bit. So hopefully you can see the changes to the spectrum screen. You may or may not like them, but that just happens to be the way that I like to see the spectrum. I don't like to see a lot of noise and mess and holding of the peak values. I just want to see the signals as they're there. So the next thing I want to do, because we're going to use this radio with WSJT and particularly with FT8, if I put the radio into upper sideband mode, which I do by pressing on the CW button and then pressing on the screen or where the mode is, and that brings up the mode selection. So if I select upper sideband, what I want to do is alter the filter widths. So if I press and hold the filter button, which is on the right hand side of the radio, it brings up this sub-menu. I can now select filter 1, 2 or 3, and what I want to do is set the bandwidth for filter 1 to be as wide as possible. So you select filter 1, click on bandwidth and then turn the main tuning dial to stretch that as far as you can. So that's 3.6K width, which will be perfect for FT8. Filter 2 we'll use it, say, at 2.4K because that's fine for normal SSB, and filter 3 is a little bit narrower. So that's perfectly fine. I think that's okay. So we'll press and hold the filter button and save that for now. The other thing I've changed is if you press menu and then press antenna, you'll see that it comes up with this settings here, which tells you which antenna socket the radio uses by default by band. Now, for me, the only change I want to make here is I want it to use antenna socket 2 for 6 meters. So I select 6 meters, I then press the antenna button on the far left and change that to 2. Now you'll see there's a 2 with a star next to it. And the star means that that hasn't been saved. There's a button labelled antenna, ANTMW, which is memory right. Press and hold that, and the radio has now remembered that every time I select the 6 meter function, we'll use antenna 2. Menu, scope, to get back to where we were. Now then, the other thing I want to talk about is the CIV settings as ICOM talk about it. So I've got a USB cable connected from this radio to my computer, and I could not get the two things to communicate at all until I made some changes. So I pressed menu, set, and then I pressed connectors, and then we find CIV. Now, the CIV address is the hex address that the radio uses. We don't need to change that, that stays as it is. The only thing here that I had to change was the CIV USB echo back. I've had to set that to on to get anything to work at all. The other thing I've done is set the baud rate to a fixed 57.6. So once you've done that, I found I was able to talk to the radio. So those two changes seem to be very important. CW pitch was the next thing I was interested in, and I couldn't really find how to set this. There's two rotary controls on the radio. One is key speed, and as you see, as I alter that, a little pop-up comes up on the screen and shows me what the words per minute setting is. But if I alter the pitch control, I can hear it making a difference, but I can't actually see what the value is set to. So if I put the radio into CW mode, hopefully you can hear the changes that that's making. So what you have to do is when the radio is in CW mode, press and hold the filter button again, and now as you turn the CW pitch setting, you can see the value that it's setting it to. So I want mine at 700 Hertz, so I'm going to press and store that. The other neat thing on this radio that I found, if you roughly tune into a CW signal, there's an auto tune button on the front which automatically tunes that signal exactly to the CW pitch that you've got it set at. The other thing that I've got on this now, if I go menu, set, network, I've not made any changes in here, but I've connected a LAN cable to this, and this radio is connected to my network, and it appears to be auto setting its time and date via that. So as long as DHCP is on, that should automatically allocate itself an IP address. If you need to do that manually, you'd have to set it up with DHCP off and then set up the IP address yourself. But for my network, it works fine with that on, so there's no actual changes needed there. So those are the basic config changes that I've made. Hopefully you'll find that useful. Now we're going to move on to set up the radio and use it in the FT8 mode using the WSJT suite of software. So, what I want to do now is just show you some settings on the computer. We've already established that we've set the CIV settings within the radio menu structure. You'll find that if you first install the ICOM driver and then connect the radio via the USB cable, you need to be careful to only connect to the USB 1 socket, because there are two on the back of this 7610. You'll end up with two COM ports and one audio device which has got a recording and a playback device within it. What I want to show you first is the audio devices. So if we start by opening up the sound you can get at this from control panel. I've got an awful lot of audio devices in mine, but something called a USB audio codec, the playback device. So this is the audio from the computer to the radio. I rename all of mine. You can edit the text in here. So I've called this IC-7610 USB audio to radio, and I've got the level set at around 23. On the recording side, there'll be a similar device called USB audio codec. Here it is. I've renamed mine IC-7610 USB audio from radio, because the microphone is the audio coming from the radio to the computer. The levels on this are extremely low. I've set mine down to 4, which is probably almost as low as it'll go and still work, but it's set down to 4. Nothing else changed in here, just the levels after it had installed. Everything else is as defaults. So what I want to do is show you use WSJT to run a bit of FT8 on this IC-7610. So I've got a demo version of the software here, set up brand new, never been run before, so I can show you how to set up the configuration. So we've got a spectrum scope screen, and we've got the main screen. Now I'm at version 1.9 RC2. This is one of the dev test versions. You don't need to worry about that too much, because the settings will be much the same. So basically we're going to go to File and Settings. First thing you need to do is stick your call sign in and your grid square. You won't do anything without that. Then you need to go to the radio. Now, the rig, in my version of this software, the IC-7610 should be listed. So there it is there. And I know for a fact that it's on COM 11. He says selecting COM 15. It's COM 11, and we earlier set it to 57.6, didn't we? 8 bits, 1 stop bit, no handshaking. Let's turn that PTT method to CAT. We're going to run the radio in USB mode, and I'm going to run a genuine split. So I'm going to click on rig. If I press test CAT, that's gone green to tell me that that's worked. Test PTT, and the radio's gone into transmit. So this communications is all working perfectly. But what I want to show you is I want to go, if we just go to the DX Labs website, and this is the OmniRig. So this is the piece of software that WSJT uses to communicate between itself and the radio. So what you can do, you can go down and go to the downloads page, and if we go down here and we find OmniRig, you need to install the OmniRig software, but what I'd also recommend you do is download the INI files for OmniRig. And what you'll find is if you open up those INI files, so let me just find this now a second, OmniRig, rig-ini.zip. In here you'll find a definition for just about every radio. These are updated a lot more often than the software. So we need the IC-7610.ini file. Now just to check where the software is running, let me find it in here. OmniRig. So OmniRig itself is running in program files x86 AFEET OmniRig. We can open the file location, and if you then double click on rigs, you'll find that all those rig definition files are in here. So if you haven't got the 7610, simply grab it from this zip file, drop it in here. You'll see mine's already in there, but you can copy that in, and then the next time you start OmniRig, it'll have support for the 7610 straight away. So what we want to do now then is set up the other aspects of the software that we need. So we've done the radio, we've tested the CAT, we know that's working, we've tested the PTT, and we know that that's working. The audio devices, we opened up the sound system earlier and we renamed these audio devices, so we just need to find the 2 appropriate audio devices for the 7610 for the input and output. The other thing I'm going to set up is I'm going to make a few changes here. So I like to see the blank line, I like to see distances in miles, TX messages to RX frequency window, yeah, that's fine. Show DXCC and work before status, I like that too. Double click on call sets TX enable, I want that. Disable TX after sending 73, I want that. And that should be about all we need in here now. So what we need to do now is check the audio settings on the radio. So I'm going to switch back to the other screen setting that I had and just show you how I'm going to set the transmit using this tune function. And before we do that though, we'll just talk about the settings that I've put up on the waterfall up here. So bins per pixel I've set to 2. We're basically displaying from around 300-ish hertz up to around 2002 or 300 hertz. We could go a bit further if we want to. That's what this does. This changes the amount of bandwidth that you see up here. I've set the start at 200 hertz. The averaging I've put down at 2. I've changed my palette to be banana because I particularly like that palette. I've switched off flatten. I've got this at current, and you can see the way I've set up the waterfall gains. That just happens to be the way I personally like the waterfall to be. again, it's personal choice. So we'll flip over to the radio now and do some quick tests using the tune function on transmit. So we're back looking at the big monitor that's connected to the radio now. You can clearly see, using my waterfall settings, hopefully you like them, you can see all the digital signals. So we're monitoring 14.074, which is the FT8 section of the 20 meter band. And you can clearly see all of the digital signals there. But before we're ready to transmit with this radio, we need to make another couple of changes. So I'm going to go press the menu button, press set, and then go connectors, and then we're going to do USB AF/IF output. The first thing I'm going to do is change the output level. I'm going to reduce that fairly drastically down to about 20%. It's not critical. It's absolutely not critical. So then what we're going to do is go to mod input. So this is where the modulation for the radio comes from. So again, I'm going to reduce the level for the modulation input down to, let's start at say 15% or thereabouts. And then data off mod. So this means, where does the modulation come from when the radio is not in a data mode? And what we want to set up here is mic, USB. So I'm going to run my radio in a USB mode, which is data off, and I'm going to use the USB connector as the source of my audio. If you were using the radio in data modes, which you could do, then for data mode 1, you would need to set this to be USB rather than whatever it was before. So there are 3 data modes. So the data mode 1, data mode 2, data mode 3. So you could set one up to be the accessory socket, you could set one up to be USB, and it looks like you can even control the audio over the LAN, which is something I haven't played with yet. But that's the one I want. If you're using the USB cable and you're running the radio in upper sideband, the source of audio needs to be the microphone first, and if not, the USB connector on the back. So that uses the USB codec that we've got set up. So that should be about all we need to worry about now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on a bit of the waterfall where I can't see anybody else transmitting on the software, and I'm going to click the tune button. So this will basically put the radio in and allow me to set up a carrier. So when I hit the tune, what I want to do is I'm going to just quickly press the tuner button on the radio to tune my antenna, make sure I'm connected to the right antenna, and then if you press on the meter, you can see that it's cycling through the different meter options. So what I'm interested in this particular instance is ALC. So what I don't want to do is overdrive the radio and create distortion products in digital modes. So if I hit the tune button, you'll see I'm putting out a carrier, but the ALC is at 0. So what we're going to do now is just cycle through again and look at power out. If you press the multi button, let's turn the power down to say 40% or something like that. Let's hit the tune button again and let's see what sort of power output I'm putting. And the answer is somewhere between not very much and nil. So I'm going to go back into my sound card settings on my computer. I'm going to go to the device that we called IC-7610 USB audio to radio. And when I'm going to hit the tune button again, I'm going to fiddle with the level control, the slider control in here, until I get to the point where I've got a sensible level of audio. And of course I've confused myself because the radio's in split. So it's the meter on the right hand side that we're interested in. So let's say that's set that to 20 watts. Let's also cycle through now and look at the ALC. And the ALC is at nothing. So I've got a power output of 20 watts, no SWR and no ALC. And that's absolutely perfect for FT8. There's no need at all to include ALC operation in your radio. You can do, it won't cause, low levels of ALC won't cause too much of a problem, but you really don't want to be adding compression products to your transmitted signal. So the radio is now in the perfect setup for running FT8, and I hope you have a whole pile of fun with it because it's a great mode. So what we're going to try and do now is show you how to set up a Panadapter on the radio. So fairly ambitiously, I'm trying to show you 2 video screens at the same time. But what I've got on the back of the radio, there are 2 BNC sockets on the back of the radio. And in the RX antenna output, I've put one of these BNC T-pieces. I've connected a BNC to BNC cable to one end, very much like that. So that's connected to the RX out The other end of that cable loops straight back into the RX in, and then I've taken another cable from the T-piece and I've connected the end of that directly to my software-defined radio. In my case, I've got one of these cross-country wireless radios that LAMCO hooked up to the end of the BNC connector. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that we've got the IC-7610 monitor, and on the left-hand side is a piece of software called SDR Console. This is one of the many SDR applications, and it happens to be my favourite. So there's a piece of configuration in here called external radio, and what we can do there is set up the external radio. It uses OmniRig that I showed you earlier. So I've got Rig 2 on OmniRig set to be my IC-7610. Mine's connected to COM11. As we set up earlier, the baud rate is 57600. 8 data bits, no parity, 1 stop bit. The other 4, both RTS and DTR, are low, and I've left these at the default. So that's the way that that's configured. I've also on the right hand side here, and I'll put an image of this bit of the screen in so you can see it, but these select boxes basically mean that the radio tracks the SDR and the SDR tracks the radio. So that's set up like that, and then the only other thing to think about is the frequency settings. You can either set this to be an IF output or to be just an antenna, and in our case we're just using the antenna, so it says antenna, same frequency as external radio. That's all you need to do. Click OK, switch on tracking, and now the frequency up here, here should be the same as the radio. And if I tune the radio, you'll see that the frequency on this display is also tuning. So the one is tracking the other. That's basically the point that I'm trying to make here. So if we now go to the radio and we go into our menu screen and we press antenna. If you remember, we looked at this antenna setting earlier. One of the options on the bottom is RX antenna. So I'm going to press RX antenna, and that will bring the RX antenna loop into the settings on this particular frequency. Switch it back to the scope settings, and now you'll see on the left-hand side the Panadapter has also got the same antenna that the radio is looking at, basically, and this will be muted in transmit, so it's quite safe to do it this way. So all of the signals that we can see close up here, we can see here. We can zoom in and out so that we can see, perhaps we want to see the whole of the band, in which case we can do that by doing very much like that. So we can see a big chunk of 20 meters now, or we can see even more of 20 meters, or we can zoom right in on the digital signals. But this allows you to connect up an SDR, have a play with the same antenna that your 7610 is looking at, get different views of the spectrum. Maybe you want to look at the signals very close on the right hand side, maybe you want to look at the whole of the band on the left hand side. Just another option to play with, and I think it's a pile of fun. So, the last thing I wanted to show you was how to use this radio with a transverter. The back of the radio includes a transverter out socket and an RX antenna in socket, the same RX in antenna we looped round for the Panadapter connections. So you'd connect the TX input of your transceiver to the transceiver output socket on the radio, and the RX output of the transceiver to the RX in on the radio. Now, I've used a spectrum analyzer on the output of the transceiver drive socket, and when you've got the radio in transceiver mode and you alter the power setting here, that's altering the output from around -7 dBm at its highest to -23 dBm at its lowest. So it does appear that you can control the output level of the transverter socket. Now, the Kenwood 990 has a similar facility, but the output of that is slightly higher in that it's at 0 dBm. But in this case it's from about -7 to -23, which I still think is quite usable, though. I don't think there's anything particularly to worry about. So we go into menu, we go into set, and we go into functions. And we go to transverter function. So the first thing we're going to do is swap that from auto. I don't know why it doesn't say off, it says auto, and we're just simply going to switch it on. Transverter offset, so in my case that's going to be 4056 42 megahertz. So enter, then I'm going to come out of here back into the main setting, put the radio in 70 megahertz, which will be 10 meters. So 28.5 megahertz is the actual radio setting, but now that you'll see that the display is reading 70.5, and that's a direct consequence of it adding this 42 megahertz to my transverter, to my VFO frequency. So I've effectively now got the radio in a mode where we'd use it as the IF drive for my transverter. I'm not going to go any further because it's wired up to a different radio at the moment and I don't really want to disturb the cables, but that's how you would set up a transverter, and I'm absolutely confident that that would work just fine. My only comment on this would be that the transverter offset set function, transverter offset, you can't have any more digits before the decimal point. So if you had a 144 megahertz transverter like I do, I could only get that to display 44. I couldn't get it to display 144. And how quite it would cope with my 10,368 megahertz transverter for 3 centimeters, I'm not entirely sure. But you can get this to transfer anywhere. So the IF output is effectively the 28.5 megahertz, and that's changing the display to be 70.5. So it's fairly well thought out and does exactly what you'd expect it to do. And as I said, from -7 to -23 dBm. You'll see on the top left of the screen, the transverter label is kind of gone a goldy colour to indicate that we're in transverter mode. I hope you found this video useful. Any questions, just get in touch with LAM and we'll try to do our best to help you.